96.3 FM, The Source.
All right, 22 minutes. Is that right? 22 minutes before 10 o'clock. Thank you for tuning in. Nice looking Friday. We are keeping our eye on a weather system down there in Mexico, and I guess we're going to get it by tomorrow or late tomorrow sometime. But it's going to rain today too. But it has nothing to do with that system. And we don't think it's going to be that bad, or we don't. Like, I'm pretending I'm one of the weathermen. They don't think it's going to be that bad. All right, one of the things that kind of boggles my mind is when I hear a celebrity campaigning against the Second Amendment. So if you were going to start a country, and you said, you know what, I want this to be for you. You know, we're not going to be the government who tells you what to do, when to do it, how to do it. We're just going to kind of set some laws. You can't kill each other. You can't steal from each other. Kind of like the Ten Commandments, you know. We're just going to set up some basic rules. And you know what? You're going to have the right to defend yourself, not just from animals that might come in your yard, and not just from the bad guys in your neighborhood that might try to hurt you or your family, but also from the government itself trying to take away your God-given rights, right? Mm-hmm. How is it possible that people don't understand what the Second Amendment is about and why it's there? I don't get that. And it's not just that. Freedom of speech, there are people who want to compromise that. When you hear the divide in philosophy in this country between some people and some other people, it almost makes you think, well, why don't we just split the country in half and tell all the people who agree on going on one side and all the people who agree with the other side go on the other side, and let's see which one is still around in 100 years. I'm guessing the one that feels like entitlements are a good idea. I mean unrealistic entitlements. We have, you know, some realistic ones, or reasonable ones, I should say, but unreasonable entitlements. I know. Oh my gosh, I'm preaching to the choir. I know, with a talk show audience. Daniel Miller is on the phone. Listen to this. He's got a book called Texit. What do you think that means? Exit. Texit, like Brexit, Britain exiting the Union, Texas exiting the Union. Daniel is a sixth-generation Texan. He's the president of the Texas Nationalist Movement. He's an advocate for Texas independence. He's the co-operator with his wife, Kara, of Radio Free Texas, one of the first online outlets for independent music created in Texas. Oh, really? He's a featured guest on a lot of the big ones like CNN, BBC, RTTV, Fox News, CNBC, and he wants to talk to you about this. Texit, why and how Texas will leave the Union. Daniel Miller, this is interesting. Good morning, sir. How are you?
Good morning. I'm great.
Where are you?
I'm in southeast Texas, just right outside of Houston.
So are the things I said in my intro part of the reason why you think Texas should just go ahead and split from the country?
Yeah, you know, I think that really feeds into it. I mean, one of the things that I talk about in Texas, and something that became very obvious to me throughout the 22 years that I've been advocating for this, is that Texans are really sick and tired of living under 180,000 pages of federal laws, rules, and regulations administered by 2.5 million unelected bureaucrats that erode at our very basic freedoms and liberties. You know, at the end of the day, Texans believe that the best people to govern Texas are Texans.
We have two shows that we are affiliates of, and they both come out of Texas. One is Glenn Beck, and one is Dana Lash. And when you listen to them talk about Texas, you realize that Texas sounds like what the United States is supposed to be. So how do you guys manage to do that when you are still under the thumb of the federal government?
Well, it's not an easy proposition. I mean, let's be honest. The political class in Washington, D.C. make it extraordinarily difficult. But, you know, it really goes back to the cultural foundations of Texas. You know, we operated as an independent republic for 9 years before joining the Union. And even before that, you know, we had to fight a revolution. You know, when it came down to a dictator in Mexico City, essentially overturning the constitutional rule of law and sending the military to take our means of protection, our 19 people that lived in the city of Gonzales raised a flag that said, "Come and take it." and defied a dictator. So we have this cultural backbone of fighting for independence. It was even Sam Houston that said that the government that governs best governs least.
I would speculate that if indeed Texas became a separate country, that a lot of people in what's left of the 49 other states would move there because it would look more like what this country is supposed to be. Now there would be those who believe, like I hate to name names, but like Nancy Pelosi seems to believe. And I think they would never move into Texas, but I think a lot of people would. I think what this country is based on is exactly what you're saying. Am I right about that?
Well, I mean, to a certain extent, we're already seeing an influx of population into Texas. Both, if you want to really look at it, they're essentially political and economic refugees. But one of the contentions that I make in the book is that, obviously a lot of the challenges that we face with the federal government are not unique to Texas. But one of the things that I also do is I dispel this myth that the right to leave the union is somehow unique to Texas. Instead, it's really a right that is enjoyed by every state. So my encouragement is through this book, I mean, obviously I want to give folks an accessible method to understand what's really happening here in Texas on this particular issue. But really, I would hope that people in other states would look at what our experiences are here with the Texit movement and use it as an inspiration to do a very similar thing with their own state.
Has the state of Texas decreased their dependence on federal funds, such as fixing highways and things like that?
Well, we're all essentially tied into that particular system to one degree or another. But, when we talk about dependence on federal money, I think it's important to just do some math. And I actually lay that out specifically in a chapter in the book. What we find is that Texas is one of about a dozen states in the union, give or take, year after year, that pays more into the federal government than we get out of it, either in direct dollars, block grants, or services. In Texas, it's astounding the amount that we overpay. We overpay year on year somewhere between $100 to $150 billion more into the federal government than we get back out of it. That's essentially the economic effect of a Hurricane Harvey hitting Texas every 9 months.
Oh my!
Wow, that's an interesting way to put it. So how it sounds like you are sure this is going to happen. It's not just a talking point that we're going to move forward and it's never going to be a reality. When do you think this might happen?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, it's even in the title of the book because I believe that it's an inevitability. I mean, obviously, as an advocate for it for well over 2 decades now, I believe it is the best course of action. But one of the things that I wanted to communicate to the readers out there and to folks that are taking a fresh look at this are some of the things that are happening politically, whether it be the growth of support, the sudden appearance of Texit in political debates here and state level candidacies. There are a lot of factors at play here that could lead one to believe, and as I do, that this is not just the best course of action for Texas, but it is absolutely the path that we will travel at some point in the very near future.
Are all of the political parties that come out of Texas, are they all in agreement then? How would their political system work? Do they have people in place that are able to be a president on down the line?
Well, that's really 2 questions. One is about where the support lies in the political parties, and the other is about the structure. And so let me take the second part first. All states, by virtue of the Constitution, are guaranteed a Republican form of government. So, all states have their own constitution, their own governing bodies, and strangely enough, all of those forms essentially mimic what a republic that is an independent, self-governing nation state would look like. But really, to the first part of what you asked about supporting the political parties, what we find is that the political parties are essentially fractured on this issue, just like any other issue and just like any political party in any state. But one of the things that I think really escaped, it went under the radar, but not for everyone, was back in 2014, Reuters conducted a poll right around the time of the Scottish independence referendum. And they asked Texas voters if they believe that our state should leave the Union and become an independent country. And what the results were astonishing, especially given the electoral makeup of Texas. There were 54% of Republicans that supported it, half of independent voters, and 35% of Democrats. So, if you lay those numbers over the way that Texans actually vote, what you're looking at is just shy under a majority of Texans believe that Texas should leave the Union, and it's about 4 to 6 percentage points more than those who wanted to stay. So really the battleground here, politically speaking, over this issue is that 12 to 16 points worth of undecided voters.
Is it fair to say that the California exit news that we've been hearing, those folks have an exact opposite reason for wanting to secede from what Texas's reasons are?
It's interesting. That's another interesting aspect of this. And although I did not write specifically about that in the book, I can tell you from my experience in dealing with these other independence movements, both here in North America and around the world, is that if you look at it from a policy or a political ideology standpoint, I mean, it would be easy to make that jump and say, look, we want to do the same things, but we want to do them for different reasons. And it's not entirely true. If you drill it down beyond sort of the superficial policy issue, what you find is the common thread among all of these independence movements, not just, right here, right now, but going back 70 years, is this right of self-government. If you look at Texit and Texit on paper, and then let's say you throw in Brexit or you throw in the Scottish independence movement, on paper, they look very dissimilar, but with similar aims. However, when you drill it down, it's just essentially the people in those places believing that they would rather govern themselves than be governed by some bureaucrats someplace else that are as fickle as the political winds that are blowing them around.
Mm-hmm. Do you know, if Texas secedes, I think you guys will probably have a pretty good military. If California secedes, I think any country in the world would be able to take it over.
Yeah.
I can't speak to that. That's up to them to make their case. But I will tell you that one of the things that we have seen commonly among these independence movements is a desire to have a strong national security. I mean, no one wants to leave the safety and security of a political union only to fall.
Right.
But what often we see is that there are already mutual defense pacts and multinational military institutions that these people can sign on to. NATO is a great example where you have multiple countries that are engaged in a mutual defense pact.
That's the only way to do it.
Right.
Yeah. Our guest is Daniel Miller, and his book is Texit, Why and How Texas Will Leave the Union. We do have the phones being lit up, so if you're okay with taking calls, I'll patch some of these through. Are you okay with that, Daniel?
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you for waiting, and good morning. You're on the air with Daniel Miller.
Yes, good morning, now, if Texas would only allow third parties to have ballot access in the state, you might almost be perfect. But they only have two parties in Texas, and my friend Scott Copeland is trying to get ballot access for the Constitution Party, and some of my other friends want access for the Reform Party and the Libertarian Party, and the laws in Texas are just about impossible to get the third parties on the ballot. And I'll hang up and listen.
All right.
Have a good day.
Thank you. Daniel?
Yeah, I mean, look, Texas has its quirks. I mean, one of the things that I have to tell folks repeatedly is that Texas is no promise of utopia. Self-government is no promise of utopia. But what it ultimately means is that whatever decisions we make here, whatever changes we make here, stay here. and cannot be overridden by some faceless bureaucrat someplace else. But to that point, I think it's important to understand is that when referendums like this happen, one of the things that you see is, that on average, the voter turnout for these is about 85% or higher. And one of the things that it spurs on is a greater, a greater political awareness among the people. So when you have these debates surrounding, whether a place wants to stay or leave, although people begin to ask questions and make assessments and reconsider their relationship of the state versus the larger union that they're in, the other thing that happens is the discussion and conversation begins to surround the issue of good governance across all spheres. So you begin to see these significant changes and significant debates not just happen in relation to the larger union and the question of whether to stay or leave, but also this desire and this thirst for reform and good government closer to home.
What kind of currency would Texas have them if it does secede from the union? What does it have now that it could back the currency?
Well, and again, that's another sort of idea that I had to really tackle in the book, because there's this misconception that Texas Day One, Independence Day +1, would have to have its own currency, and that's not entirely correct. Texas is well set to where we could do something like that, but you want to do these things in a way that minimizes disruption. Okay, so that's, if you look at all of the successful movements like this around the world, the ones that have fared the best on the other end have done everything they can to mitigate disruption across all spheres, political, economic. So, what I talk about in the book are some directions that Texas could go. One of the things that Texas could do right off the bat is essentially establish an informal currency union with the United States. It's essentially a unilateral adoption of the U.S. dollar for the transition period. However, that being said, that is probably not the best long-term solution for Texas. The best long-term solution for Texas would be the establishment of our own currency and a pullout of the United States dollar, because, as we know, $21 trillion worth of national debt, plus, another $100 and some odd trillion worth of unfunded liabilities are going to come crashing in at some point. And, we're already seeing moves of foreign holders of U.S. dollars begin to dump them on the market. So there are some concerns there, but in the short term, it's eminently doable. In the long term, Texas is going to have to do something toward establishing its own currency.
Would the borders be the same as the state lines are now?
Yeah, I mean, there are, there's this. Let me just put it this way, and it probably deals with a lot of these issues. Things stay the way they are until they no longer are the way that they are. And I know it sounds like a silly statement, but it's essentially true. The borders of Texas are well established and well defined, not just the international border with Mexico, but the borders with the rest of the states. So, there's nothing that would precipitate a change in that regard.
Well, and the only reason I'm asking, again, because California does not follow their own state line with their exit consideration. They're cutting their place up, as what it looks like to me. So what would prevent a civil war? Are we set up as a country to allow states to secede from the Union without a civil war?
Yeah, it's not the 1860s anymore, and I love it when the opposition loves to throw the Civil War card down and say, this would cause civil war.
Well, I'm not opposition, by the way. I just wondered about it.
That's a good question.
No, I know, but I just wanted you to understand that it's something that those that are opposed to that is one of their first go-tos. I mean, beyond it's unconstitutional. They love to throw that one out first. But the fact is, it's just not 1860 anymore. Things are not handled in the way that they were back then. But really, there are two reasons why I believe that this will happen. Number one is that since the Civil War, the United States has entered into many covenants and agreements and treaties that respect and protect the right of self-determination. So, you've got a great example where the United States went over and literally fought for Kosovo's independence. But yet, if they fail to support any state leaving the Union, there would be such an international backlash that it wouldn't happen. So, the other part of that is the response of the United States military. Now, there was a zombie poll a few years back where they actually asked active duty military and their families if they believe that leaving the Union was an absolute right. And just shy under half of the United States military, active duty and their families, believe that it was a right. Well, if that's the case, then they're viewing it, when they talk about it as a fundamental right, they're looking at it as the same kind of right as freedom of speech, freedom of religion, right to keep and bear arms, the rights against illegal search and seizure. So essentially, they view it on par with any of the rest of the rights within the Bill of Rights. So now you've got half of the military that if the federal government decided to impose a military response, they would have to deal with the fact that half of their military believes that it is both immoral and illegal. And that provides a whole new set of challenges from the war-fighting side of it. So, it's impractical. At the end of the day, the best course of action is for us to shake hands and leave as friends and continue to trade and defend one another and travel amongst one another.
Yeah,
but let the bureaucracy stay in D.C. and let Texans govern themselves.
The book is called Texit, Why and How Texas Will Leave the Union. Daniel Miller wrote the book, and he is the president of the Texas Nationalist Movement. The book is on Amazon, where it's getting good reviews. And do you have a website you can mention real quickly?
Absolutely. They can visit me at texasnationalist.com.
Okay. Daniel Miller, thank you so much. And have a great Memorial Day weekend.
Hey, thank you. Y'all have a great weekend as well.
Okay, we'll be right back.
Fox News Radio, I'm Chris Foster. Harvey Weinstein is led from a police station in handcuffs in New York. The former movie mogul turned himself in to face criminal charges including rape involving 2 women. They're among dozens of accusers.
The rape charge relates to a woman who has not spoken publicly or been identified. Weinstein stepped out of a black SUV and turned himself in to the NYPD's first precinct.